Greetings, friends. Today we will dive into the fascinating and inspiring story that happened in 1968 with a young parachutist from Ohio named Mickey Robinson. At the age of 19, he experienced not only a tragic plane crash, but also an incredible near-death experience that changed his life forever. This incident not only brought him to the edge of life, but also opened the door to a world of spiritual insight for him. As a person who has experienced such profound changes, Mickey has become a symbol of resilience, faith, and rebirth. His story continues to inspire people around the world, reminding them that even in moments of despair, there is hope for healing and recovery. August 1968. Mickey Robinson was a professional skydiver, passionate about extreme sports and an active life. He and his team went on another training parachute jump. The flight started as usual, but immediately after takeoff, a disaster occurred. The engine failed and the plane crashed. An explosion occurred as a result of hitting the ground. The spilled fuel instantly engulfed everything with fire. 4 of his friends managed to get out of the fire, but Mickey was trapped in a burning plane. His body instantly ignited, and he was trapped inside the flaming vessel. His feet were stuck in the wing hole, and he couldn't get out on his own. A 19-year-old boy suffered severe burns. When he was finally rescued, it turned out that third-degree burns covered more than 40% of his body. The fire left him with multiple severe injuries: burns, internal organ damage, blindness in one eye, and severe destruction of skin tissue. After being taken to the hospital, a long struggle for life began. The doctors did not believe that he could survive. Mickey's body temperature dropped rapidly and infectious complications began. His right arm had atrophied and his wounds continued to worsen. The medical prognosis was grim, and doctors advised the family to prepare for the worst. Death seemed inevitable. It was at this moment that Mickey experienced his first near-death experience. In a state of pain, despair, and physical suffering, he felt an incredible sense of peace enveloping his spirit. He felt that his body no longer existed, and his soul began to transcend the physical world. He found himself in a space where there was no pain, no time, and no boundaries. It was a light so bright that Mickey said, "It was cleaner than anything I've ever seen." The feeling that he was on the verge of death remained in his memory forever. He saw the door closing in front of him, and he knew that if it closed, he would be forever separated from life. Mickey realized that this moment was his passage to the afterlife. Then he began to pray. Although he had not been a religious person before, he prayed for a second chance, for forgiveness and a return to life. At that moment, he felt the endless love and peace that enveloped him. It was not just a physical return, but a spiritual renewal, an awareness of a higher power and its participation in his fate. After the near-death experience, a long recovery process began. Despite the gloomy forecasts, Mickey began to recover surprisingly quickly. His right eye, which doctors considered to be permanently damaged, was completely restored. The miraculous healing continued. Doctors feared that his right arm would have to be amputated, but this did not happen. Not only did he survive, but he was also able to restore its functionality. After going through this tragedy, Mickey realized that his return to life was not just a medical miracle, but also a spiritual salvation. He realized that he had been given a new life, not only physically, but also spiritually. Mickey began to perceive his suffering and miraculous healing as a call to a new path. This epiphany led him to serve other people. He began to tell his story, inspiring people to hope and believe. He became a preacher, founded his own Christian mission, and began lecturing around the world. He wrote books in which he described his experiences in detail and encouraged people to seek meaning in life beyond material possessions and physical existence. The story of Mickey Robinson has become a source of inspiration for thousands of people who have faced life difficulties, loss of hope, and fear of death. The near-death experience radically changed his worldview. Before the disaster, he was a young, active man, focused on sports and did not think about the possibility of death. But his life took a completely new turn. He realized that life is not just a physical existence, but also a spiritual path. Robinson claimed that his experience allowed him to see the boundary between life and death. He realized that this was just a transition to another, more important world. Mickey believed that his task was to show people that even the most difficult trials lead to spiritual rebirth and that life continues beyond physical existence. The story of Mickey Robinson is an amazing example of human resilience, spiritual rebirth, and the power of faith. His near-death experience changed not only his physical condition, but his entire life. Today, he continues to share his experience, helping others overcome life's difficulties. One man who survived clinical death returned with answers that overturn ideas about life and death. Priest Don Piper, who did not believe in stories about the afterlife, found himself on the threshold of another dimension, where time and space seemed to cease to exist. Many times I've heard people talk about their near-death experiences. I thought that if they saw anything at the moment of clinical death, it was only the result of abnormalities in their brain. I had no doubts about their sincerity, but I was convinced that they believed in what they wanted to believe. I wouldn't change my mind now if I hadn't been in the same situation, says Don Piper. Don Piper suffered clinical death at the age of 38. He was returning from church that day. It was raining, and in order to shorten the way home, he decided to take another road. When he was crossing a bridge over a river, a truck driven by an inexperienced driver crashed into his car. Don doesn't remember the actual collision. The only thing he remembered was the bright light. When he saw him, he immediately appeared in heaven. It later turned out that several drivers were injured in that accident, but no one was in such a critical condition as he was. 4 ambulance workers examined him and came to the same conclusion: Don Piper is dead. He did not need medical attention. So the doctor switched to other victims. His body was left lying on the bridge. Don Piper says that when he died, he did not fly through a dark tunnel, as some people describe. He saw a bridge and then a bright light, something unearthly, indescribable. In a moment, Don found himself in a place that looked like heaven. He found himself at the gate, from which light was pouring out, resembling a pearl in a shell. At that moment, he did not feel any needs and knew that he would no longer have any needs. Don didn't think about Earth or those who were left behind. Standing at the gate, he saw familiar people heading towards him. These were all those who had died and whom he knew. Their presence did not surprise Don. It seemed completely natural to him. Each of these people had an impact on his life in some way. Many of them were not familiar to him on Earth, but despite this, it seemed that they were friendly and had known each other all their lives. The first person he saw was his father, and then his grandfather, whom everyone called Joe. Don remembers, "I was at my grandfather's house when he had a heart attack. After that, I went with my parents to the hospital where Joe was taken. We waited for the doctor to tell us. After a while, the doctor came out and said, 'It's a pity, we did everything we could.'" One of the people who met Don at the gate was his childhood friend Mike Wood. Mike grew up in a religious family and was himself a devout Christian. He had a lot of friends, and after graduating from high school, he was given a scholarship to Louisiana State University. At the age of 19, he died in a car accident. At his funeral, Don couldn't stop crying, not understanding why God took the life of a man who was so devoted to him. Among those who met Don was also Barry Wilson, with whom he went to school. Barry drowned in the lake when he was still a schoolboy, but now during this meeting he looked mature. Don also saw his great-grandmother Hattie, whom he remembered from childhood only after she was stricken with osteoporosis. Her head and shoulders were always tilted forward. He especially remembered her wrinkled face and false teeth, which she didn't wear very often. But in heaven, her teeth were shining, and she was smiling at him. He knew they were her own teeth. Now Hattie no longer walked bent over, and her wrinkles were wiped off her face. As soon as Don looked at her radiant face, he felt that age didn't matter here. They all started moving towards the gate at the same time. When Don took a step towards those who met him, he felt an indescribable thrill, realizing that with each step, more miracles awaited him. Don Piper remembers that when he looked through the gate, he didn't feel anxious. None of them bothered him. Don Piper heard the music. As a child, he spent a lot of time in the village, walking in the meadow and making his way through the tall grass. He often startled birds, which took off by making a noise of wings. It was the sound of wings that sounded like the music he heard as he headed for the gate. This music was the most beautiful and pleasant that he had ever heard. The music there surpassed anything we can imagine. Don Piper felt like he was hearing thousands of different melodies at the same time. However, these melodies were not chaos. With his hearing, he could distinguish each of them. This music still sounds in it, although more than 30 years have passed since that moment. He saw colors he had never seen before. According to him, on Earth we can only see a grain of that beauty when, for example, we look at the sunset or at a crystal clear lake in the sunlight. But even all this cannot be compared with the beauty of another world. Don stopped right at the gate. Now he could see what was happening behind them. He saw a city with paved golden roads. He was amazed. If he had gone further, he would have seen something even more amazing. But when he was ready to go through the gate, they disappeared. One priest who was returning from a Christian conference on the same road as Don found out about his accident. He went up to his body and began to pray, holding his shoulder. After the accident, one of his legs became shorter, and he was no longer the same as before. He was well beaten, but he was not defeated. Every day Don asked himself the question, why wasn't he allowed to see paradise? And then they took it all away. Don Piper is convinced that he came back thanks to the prayer of that priest. He thinks he had to go through all this to say, after death, life is just beginning. He realized that there was some reason why he was left among the living on Earth. Perhaps it was in order for him to talk about his experiences. If we know where we are going after death, shouldn't our life become much better, happier, and more beautiful now? But according to Don, people don't understand this. We often behave as if we've lost something, as if we've been hurt and broken. For a long time, Don was bedridden, and no one knew if he would be able to walk again. One day, he realized that if he overcame all the challenges, it would help others in similar situations. Maybe that's another reason why he's still alive. Write in the comments, did you know about this outstanding person before? Do you believe in life after death? Recently, some interesting videos were released on my channel. I strongly advise you to watch them. Please don't forget to like this video if you liked it. See you soon.